What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 101 of the Steam Deck Podcast, Flip Screen Games weekly gaming podcast, all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Max Wright.
Ahoy, ahoy! How are you, Pete?
Full steam ahead, Max. I'm doing good. How
Full
are you?
steam ahead on the deck. I'm very well. I'm just happy to be talking about things as always. I like to yap. I'm a yapper.
You must be, right? We're in good company. Yeah, we got a fun one today. We've got a little bit of news that we're going to kick things off with. There is a new feature that has just been shipped on Steam as of recording today. I'm just going to read right from the On Deck tweet. Good morning. We've just shipped a new feature on Steam that shows when a customer review was written by someone who played primarily on Steam Deck. Keep an eye out for the deck icon to see how these players reviewed the game and let us know what you think. And I thought this was cute too. There's like a screenshot included and it has somebody's review that's kind of like showing what the badge looks like. So, if you're familiar with Steam reviews, right, there'll be the thumbs up or the thumbs down, recommended, whatever, how many hours that they played. And then now in like the far right corner of that little kind of bar, there's a Steam Deck icon and a star, which shows, I guess, that was where they primarily played the game. And it's from someone called Naptime Warrior, and it's like just like, oh, I'm a tired dad, and I'm always trying to play games on deck. This game's great on deck. Awesome, right? This is a fantastic feature. Just another one of the like very friendly community features that they've rolled out with Steam Deck in mind. And I think, we talk a lot on this show about how Steam Deck Verified is kind of a disappointing system because it really doesn't give you enough information to know whether or not the game is going to run well. There are plenty of games that play great that are not deck verified. There are plenty of games that are deck verified that don't really play well, and or have major caveats, right, to playing. And it's great to have this kind of ability to have a baked in system rather than my first move being going to Google or YouTube and being like,
Yeah.
how's this play on Steam Deck, and hoping that somebody has already done a breakdown.
Yeah. I always rush to ProtonDB, or if I'm looking at a game on Steam, I've got the CSS loader plugin that gives you a little. So I've got rid of the verified one. I've just got the gold, platinum, whatever.
Yeah.
ProtonDB one. You click on that, it brings it up. But this is sort of handy if you're in the shop and you don't want to have to then pull out your phone and Google something. You can just see how people have enjoyed it. Steam reviews aren't somewhere I check very often. I sometimes will if I'm like completely unaware of a game, but then sometimes it's I think thumbs up, thumbs down, it works, but also you can get people that thumbs down for ridiculous reasons, and you really have to look quite hard. But if if this is, you know, it's very quick. You can just see, yeah, they played it on Steam Deck. That's enough for me, I guess, to know. Yeah, they've played this game a lot on Steam Deck. You can see how many hours they've played as well. So if you know they've primarily played that on Steam Deck, it's safe for you to get that.
Yeah, and like I like the idea of being able to filter by people who played on deck, right? Because it's like those are going to be the reviews that are most relevant to us, right?
Hmm.
Um, or at least if you plan on playing the game on deck, which is great. I think aside from like the top 100 or what I guess top 20, right? It's 100 is like much longer.
Hmm.
That's like for the like whole year or whatever. But like the top 20s that they do every month or whatever, like we get those check-ins and it's easy to find out kind of like what are the games that definitely work. But if you're
Yeah.
looking to play something that was maybe a smaller release, something that's a little bit more obscure, and there's not as much conversation about it, it'll be really nice to have this ability to, you know, learn from the community.
Yeah. And like it's we've said this before. It's shocking how much you can play on the deck anyway. I mean, I was looking through my list of all the games I've beaten so far this year. Just preparing for the end of the year. We do our big game of the year conversation. I was just flicking through them all, and I realized that I'd played every single one of them on Steam Deck, bar
Wow.
three. That's out of like 34, and those three I either streamed to the Steam Deck from my PC or streamed to the Steam Deck from my PS5. So technically, I've played them all on deck, and they all worked fine. And that's
That's
quite a big
awesome.
mix of AAA and indie and stuff like that, and emulated stuff, obviously.
Yeah, I've definitely not played all my games on deck this year, but a good amount of my favorite games this year have been on Steam Deck. It's been a
It's just my
it's been a really good year for Steam Deck.
yeah. I mean, it's still my favorite way to play. Nothing has changed this year. I can't believe there was a chunk last year before I moved where I didn't really play much on the deck, and I sort of let the deck die. and I was playing a lot more either sort of on the PC, not as much, but like on PS5 and Switch a lot.
Yeah.
But as soon as I picked that deck back up, plugged it in, I just haven't put it down since.
Nice. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about games that are improved by the Steam Deck. You had an idea for a topic, and we'll jump into that now. If you guys want to let us know what you think about the Steam Deck review system, definitely let us know
Mhm.
how it's benefiting you in the weeks to come as you see it start rolling out. But Max had an idea for a main topic today that we're going to jump into here in just a second, which is about games that are improved by the Steam Deck. So these are games that are kind of just natively better on Steam Deck, are made more accessible on Steam Deck, that are, just kind of enhanced just by seemingly, by being playable on the device alone.
Yep. I The reason I thought of this is that over the last few days, well, I wasn't very well over the weekend and the very start of the week, and I was just sort of like feeling a bit sorry for myself, and I was just going through some like old classics I liked, Symphony of the Night, Super Metroid, and I got to the end of Super Metroid and was like, oh, like what other Metroid games can I play? I played them all last year. I was like, oh, what Metroid game maybe I haven't I played in a while, and I thought of Metroid Other M, which is a game that when it first came out in 2010, very, very excited for, thought it was going to like revolutionize the series. Didn't quite do that, bit of a lukewarm reception. I have since then just sort of like not played it. I've been quite negative on it when it comes up. I'm like, oh, it's not worth it for all the, control schemes weird. There's moments where you have to point at the screen and find something on the screen, but because it's a 480p screen, you're like fighting through all these pixels to look at it. And I was like, I wonder if someone's played it on the Steam Deck. And I found a control scheme on Reddit that someone had made for Dolphin that was specifically for Steam Deck. You can just download it, add it to Dolphin, and then choose that as your input method. That essentially maps all of the waggling and the pointing and all of the different things that the Wiimote did because you played it by on a single Wiimote, turned on its side like an NES controller for a 3D game. It was shocking. To go into first person, you had to then point at the screen and then aim and then quick. It was just a bit nonsensical.
Bit wonky.
It was very wonky, and I thought that was something I'd never be able to play on emulation because I thought that's too complicated. That someone had done the work for me, and I found that I actually really enjoyed the game. I hadn't played it in 13 years, um, and a lot of the things that I didn't like about the game were solved, and that was sort of just from playing it on the deck with this control scheme. Now, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about, not just about Other End, but all of these games, they're not. Some of them aren't exclusive to the deck, but the deck, because it is one of the most accessible sort of like handheld portals to into PC gaming. For me, the Steam Deck encapsulates what makes this so accessible and so easy to play, pick up and play. But all of these things, or most of these things, can be done on PC with a normal controller.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I think what's interesting though is like I see what you're saying. That like obviously like things like emulation are like not unique to the Steam Deck, but I do think that there is something to be said about like it being this all-in-one device,
yeah.
because I think it's like it is that thing of there's something about holding a console in your hands and, like, not having, like, a window around your emulator or something
hmm
like that, that, like, it does make it feel more, like, intimate and, like, that it feels like a native experience, and I think
Yeah, you're on the home screen, you're clicking on the this game from 1994, you click on it and it boots up straight away exactly as you want it to, and it's right there.
And I think, when you're talking about something like, Other M where you can kind of like make adjustments to the way that it's played to make it more traditional and make it more
Mhm,
enjoyable is like that's like a really huge benefit and like
mhm,
a really interesting like dynamic element to what the Steam Deck offers, and I feel
absolutely.
like uh one of the things that I know you have on your list that we're going to talk about a little bit is like um, fan games and stuff like that, which is something we've talked about a lot. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's something that I really love about the deck is like how much it kind of like adds a greater air of legitimacy to those
Yes, yeah.
releases, and it makes them feel like they're standing shoulder to shoulder with any other game that came out that year. Like
Mhm.
between you, me, and the listeners here, one of the games I am currently considering for my top 10 for game of the year this year is a fan made remake of an old favorite game of mine that just came out. And that I think
I'm
is is
really
is
racking my brains trying to work out what this could possibly be.
I have mentioned it in the past, but
Okay.
if you're an eagle-eared listener, maybe you'll remember. And if you get it right in the comments, if somebody wants to comment with what they think it is, I will let everybody know next week that they were correct and give them credit. Otherwise, maybe
This is a
just
fun game. I'm gonna try and work
just
this
a little
out.
secret that you can think about. What
Yeah.
what cool fan made games came out this year that are of a game that I love? Think about that.
And fan-made games are definitely a part of it, but, like, even old I'm just gonna jump back to Metro Other M because the things that so specifically make it better on the deck than anywhere else is, instead of having to point the controller, you'd think that might be a complicated system to sort of port that, but the way that the controller's set up, I could just download and do and a lot of these things, because MU Deck is so good in that you download it and it automatically configures it all for you. I didn't really have to do a lot. I didn't have to mess around because I could just take someone else's work and apply
And
it.
just load it in.
Yeah, yeah, and it makes the game feel like a native sort of remastered port. It's in 720p, so the visuals are clearer. I don't have to point the thing at anything. I can hold down L2 and it just automatically swaps to first person. I've then got my thumb on the thumbstick, and I've got gyro aiming, which still allows me to have that similar sort of pointer thing that they were going for. Um, and just a lot of the things that I didn't like about the game have been fixed purely by playing it on the Steam Deck, and it's given that game a second lease of life for me. But like you said about fan games, there's ones that we spoke about before, and not fan games, sorry, like these are like fan ports, I guess. Things like the Ocarina of Time port for the Steam Deck, I gave that a little play.
Ship
Got to
of
like the second
Theseus, right?
Ship of Harkinian, I think is
Okay,
actually
right.
what it's called. Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
a Ship of Theseus joke, excuse me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was able to. I got to like the second dungeon, and I was like, that felt like I was playing that on PC, and there's no other than sorry, felt like I was playing that on the Steam Deck as a native experience. It was running at 90 FPS. I had like a texture pack installed, so it's like HD textures. The button mapping, I was able to make it sort of look like the Steam Deck's buttons. So the things I want to
That's
press
so
are where
cool.
they are. And if you had that on Switch and you're playing Ocarina of Time on Switch, the buttons wouldn't be where you'd expect them to be, and you have to sort of work out what is the C stick. Whereas this has, when it wants you to press a button, it's the Steam Deck's button that you can see, so you know what to click, and it just takes that frustration out of playing old games away. Um, and you get all the native things you can do, like you can choose your resolution, you can tweak things you don't like, you can set settings, you can prioritize. I don't know, visuals over frame rate, or whatever. It's essentially a PC game, right?
Sure.
And we spoke about this a lot, so I'm not going to harp on it too much. But that sort of thing, in a handheld form factor, is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And there's more of these being worked on. I think they're working on Super Metroid. They're working on Symphony of the Night, two games I like a lot. They've done Link to the Past, like all of these things that fans are working on. Um, these are things I'm worried about that them disappearing, but these things always crop back up.
Yeah, that happened with the Link's Awakening release. If you remember
Yeah.
that, it was like almost immediately gone. I still have the files. I've never been able to get it to work. Like it kept
Oh,
like having
really?
like a crashing issue. And
Okay.
Steve and I tried to work it out. We just could not figure it out.
Oh,
I'm like,
okay.
well, I'm building a new PC, so I'll
There we
get it
go.
launched up on that one.
Yeah,
Uh,
I got Steve sent me over his files, and I just got it working.
yeah,
Um,
I never tried getting it on the deck. I wanted to try it on my regular PC first, and
mhm.
I couldn't. Because I wanted to set it up on I have a 3 monitor setup, and I was like, I want to play it in super widescreen and just see what
A
that was like.
and what's great about things like that is that it's the original game. They've not made a new version of the game. They've not remade the game. It's the original game as Nintendo or whoever had developed it and designed it. It's just you can do things like fill the screen with the entire map and make Link teeny tiny if you want to. If you've got a massive TV, you might want to be able to see all of that information because you're circumventing the hardware limitations of the systems at the time in a way that emulation even can't. You can emulate all of these games if you wanted to, but you don't get the sort of minute control that comes with PC gaming. And it's just not going to be as good as these made for PC, um, native experiences. Like this is probably the best way to play Ocarina of Time, purely for the fact that it is Ocarina of Time. It's not a fan remake of Ocarina of Time, so to speak. It's just the original game, decompiled, um, and put back together on PC. So yeah, these are experiences that are best played on the Steam Deck, I think. Anyway,
I think one of the big ones for me has been like licensed games too.
Mhm.
You know, because like I know that that's something that you have brought up a bit in the past. Steve has like famously talked about how Toy Story 2 on
Toy
the
Story 2.
PlayStation is like one of
Yeah.
his favorite games from his childhood, stuff like that. Um, and I think that as much as we are very, very nostalgia driven in this industry, and there are a lot of publishers that put out legacy collections and are constantly re-releasing some old classics. There are a
Mhm.
lot of games that like don't get the luxury of that treatment, or sometimes when they do get a port, there's like key elements missing, right? Like because a license expired or something like
Yeah.
that. And
We spoke
you know,
all about this with Chemical Flood, who's got his, uh, Abandonware Emporium Discord channel, which is full of games like that, games that have been lost to the ages, PC games that you can't get anymore. Deadpool was the big one a couple of weeks ago when the movie came out.
right?
I played through
Everybody wants to go back
Transformers
and play it.
Devastation. Exactly, and they couldn't, whereas that sort of allows you to do that. And the only way you could do that, I guess you could buy the discs, for the other consoles, but, to be able to just boot up the official PC versions instead of emulating them is great.
And that was actually what I was gonna argue is that, like, I think, you could buy the original versions, and there are some of these games where that's doable, like something like Deadpool, where, like, you could get a disc of that game I mean, theoretically, I know it's not 100% support, but, like, you could pop that into your Series X, and it'll still work, right? And, like, that's great. But for games that are older than that, I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
there are some Xbox games that are still an exception, but let's say PlayStation 2, GameCube, the other platforms. There are a lot of those games like that's just not the case, right? Like there isn't a way for you to play a game like the original Animal Crossing or something like, famously, right? Like in the early days of this podcast, or like when even before the Steam Deck podcast, when Steve and I were talking about it over on the Flip Screen podcast. One of the games I was most excited about to go back and play was Tony Hawk's Underground, right? And
Mhm.
you know, even with something like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake, right? Like there are things that are different. Like there are changes that have been made, there are updates that have been made, there are soundtrack differences, things like that. So it's like with games like that, if you want to go back and experience them as they were, or like even something like Grand Theft Auto, right? Like the modern releases of that game are based on the like second or third version of it where there were some changes made for like
Mhm.
censorship or like again licenses expiring, things like that. And that was even true of like during the PS2 era. Like if you get a original copy of it versus one that was printed on the third, second, fourth printing run, there are differences on those discs. And again, like when it comes to preservation, when it comes to playing the game as you remember it, things like that, like or as right, like as intended, quote unquote, like there is uh a lot of compromise sometimes with playing older games in a modern way. And like there are dozens of examples where that's a good thing and the updates are positive and they make it more accessible and yada yada yada. But there are a ton of examples where they aren't, or where even if the remake is good, it is different, right? Like something
Yeah.
like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy where like the mechanics are a little bit different, right? Like the way that the
Yeah.
jump works is a little bit different. And
The
like
c the even the model just having a slight curve to it means that your muscle memory doesn't work anymore because you're thinking, "Okay, I can just stand on the edge of here," but actually your character will then slip, and it's like, "Well, that's not how I remember it being."
exactly. And it's nice to be able to have like I remember when I first got my Steam Deck, Sarah was like so excited to play Simpsons Hit and Run, right? Because
Mhm.
it's just like, "Oh my
I
god,
One of the first things I did too.
fantastic game," right? And it's like there's no way to play it unless you
Yeah.
have a copy and you're maintaining the old system and yada yada yada. And in a lot of those cases, right, like there's not only like, okay, I need to have a PlayStation and a copy of this game. I also need to buy an upscaler. I need to do this,
Mhm.
I need to do that. And that's that might work. It might get to the point where you can play it on your television, but it's not going to benefit from performance improvements, which was something
Yeah.
that like the like loading screens non-existent, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah, 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 yeah.
smoother textures, like all those kinds of things, just because it's running on better hardware and it
Mhm.
doesn't it's more optimized.
And Hit and Run also has a PC. They've actually done like a PC port. I think it's either a PC port or it's a copy of the non-existent PC version. I don't know which one it is, but you can run that game instead of running it for an emulator. You can run it again natively on Steam Deck and take advantage of the performance boosts. Um, but like you said about having to get the PS2, there are people that have all the original hardware, and that's because they like having the original hardware, and they like, there are people who are purists about playing games on CRTs and playing games. I remember I watched a video recently about all the different versions of Symphony of the Night, and it went into so much detail of like, right, this version on the uh, PSP, um, that it's not a full. You can't get like a 1-to-1 ratio when you upscale it, so it's like a bit janky. Or there's this version where it's not you can only have these certain resolutions or whatever. And
Mhm.
if you want to have the core experience, you need to play it on original hardware on the original system. And there's a conversation recently also about sprites, about how people have
Yeah.
nostalgia for sprites on the SNES and stuff, and even the PS1. And then modern indie games have taken that, because people might have experienced these games for the first time on emulators or on better TVs and stuff like that, and therefore you're sort of forcing nostalgia for a style of pixel art that is meant to look like line art when it's on a CRT TV, but actually comes across looking worse, and the games actually look better played on the original hardware than they do now. Which is why I'm going to jump onto another point here, because this
Go for it.
perfectly leads me into something I did recently, which is when I was playing Symphony of the Night and I was playing Super Metroid, because I'd seen this sort of thing recently. I was like, okay, what if I was to put a CRT filter over it? I think there have been scanline shaders before that haven't been good, but in recent years, the level of emulation of CRT sort of artifacts and scan lines and like the curvature of the screen and stuff, you can, because the systems are more powerful, you can run those and sort of almost emulate the original look.
Yeah.
So I did that with Symphony of the Night. I found a CRT sort of shader. I looked through all of them, and EmuDeck comes with them all pre-installed. You can just go on EmuDeck, you can apply these shaders, and it's got a huge list from everything from like CRT to Game Boy LCD to Game Boy proper colors I'll get into in a second, and all these things. And I could just go in, pick the one that I like the look of best, and it enhanced my experience because I felt like I was seeing the art as it was intended to be seen by the developers. I was, there was so much extra texture involved when you sort of like, so much extra depth as well. With these things that look like just sort of dodgy pixels are actually like nicely drawn artwork, and when it's all blended together, it actually sort of gives a curvature to things and things like that, and it's all very, very nice. I did the same for Super Metroid. It's probably the best I've ever seen that game look. The game still, I think, still has incredible pixel art and great atmosphere, but with this filter over the top of it, it was like there was layers to the things I wasn't seeing before. I
It
was seeing darkness. I was seeing like I said, just more texture in things, and it made Samus look like a hand drawn character running, and her animation didn't have any jank to it because it just felt smooth because it was running through, this filter that was designed to look like it did on a CRT, and it was just a better experience.
Yeah, there really is something to how that influences that art style, and, like,
Mm,
it's something that I don't think I even really realized until it was pointed out to me because, like, there's been that gradual change, right? Like, when you're playing on that when it's contemporary, you're not thinking about how it looks different until it's like, well, now I'm trying to play HD games on this and they don't work, right? So
mm.
now it feels dated, right? But it's certainly not like a one-to-one thing. Like there's a real advantage to CRT in many, many ways. And there's definitely a big community of people that like, are out there maintaining and keeping those rigs alive because they do really add something, you know?
Yeah, I'd really like one. I've seen like I watched a Digital Foundry putting a PS5 on a CRT TV,
Yeah.
uh,
I have
and
everything I need to set that up, and once I'm done moving, it's gonna be one of the fixtures of my
mm,
new setup. I'm very excited.
it just because it doesn't have a refresh rate and all these things, games just look really sort of smooth, and sort of you don't have to have, because it's not pixels, you don't have jagged edges, or you don't need anti-aliasing because the nature of the TV just sort of makes everything look smoother and nicer, and
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing that I hadn't really experienced before or really thought about before. And I had this recently where I was watching a video earlier about the Game Boy Advance, and how the Game Boy Advance, the early Game Boy Advance games, so on the original Game Boy Advance before the SP came out and put a backlight on it, because those games were designed to be played on this dark, kind of shitty LCD screen, they had to bump the colors up, the vibrancy and the sort of the
Right?
gamma on the colors up to compensate for that. So when you play these games on, whether you're playing a Game Boy Advance game on Switch Online or you're emulating the game, what you're seeing is like a almost too vibrant. You're not seeing the original vision, and this got me curious. So I started like flicking through uh, RetroArch, sorry, CRT, sorry, the filters like the shaders because I knew where the CRT ones, and I was like, are there ones for the Game Boy Advance? And there was. There's one that emulates the Game Boy Advance's LCD screen and the original colors you're supposed to see, and it improved the atmosphere of Metroid Fusion. I was giving that a go. And
Absolutely.
there's a bit at the start of the game where you're like going through a um like the lights are supposed to be off. There's a spotlight on you, or like you're supposed to have like a light around you, but it doesn't really play on the. When I first played it on the SP, it didn't really play then. It hasn't played on replays. As soon as I turned on this shader and you know the colors were more muted and the LCD, was doing similar to what the CRT ones, where it sort of like blends some of the pixels together. You were getting this experience, like this depth, this atmosphere that I'd never experienced playing this game before. And I played this game 50 times. I played this game like what for 20 years now. I've been playing this game at least once a year, and I'm not, I'm getting a brand new experience with it, and it's something that I have never thought about before when I'm emulating. It's something I certainly wouldn't be able to do on the Switch, because on the Switch Online stuff, you just get what you're given. Whereas to be able to
Right.
actually apply this thing, and it's all optional. And there's different options as well. You can pick if you don't want the LCD effect, you can just have the colors are slightly more muted, and it does maybe not enhance the experience if that's not for you, but it does give you an idea of what the vision was meant to be. And for Metro Fusion, it certainly improved the atmosphere for me. Um, and I just think that's something that's if you're someone that plays EmuDeck, it's already there. Plays games on EmuDeck, so it's already there for you. You just need to go in and apply it, and you can play around and see what works for you. But I played, PS1 games, SNES games, Game Boy Advance games. I played a PS2 game, uh, Castlevania: Lament of Innocence, which I whacked on a CRT filter on just to see, and I felt like I was getting like I don't know. It made it feel like I wasn't looking at a game that's ugly by today's standard. I was looking at a game that looked very good at the time, if that makes sense. And I was feeling how that would have looked at the time, as opposed to looking at it from I am now. I was looking at
Yeah,
it like,
being
oh,
improperly displayed.
yeah. I was looking at the art style that was intended, and I was like, oh, I appreciate this. There's atmosphere here. There's a nice vibe to this, and the colors and all that, the way they all blur together, as opposed to it being lines of color and stuff like that. It was just a nice experience.
Yeah, I've always been a big defender of that art style and of, like, a lot of older, like, print formats even like that too. Like, there was a point where that was very common in, like, comic book printing, right? Like, that's the case with, like, the Game Boy where there's a limited color palette, and I think that, like, it's the same reason that I think, like, chiptune is so rewarding and something that of thing that people still enjoy is that, like, artistic limitation breeds creativity,
Hmm.
and I think that, like, it's so easy to look at that stuff when it's flattened and presented in this, like, very, like, you know, um, kinda sterile way, and it's like, that's not, that's not the intent of the
Hmm.
style, and you're not really, appreciating, like, the nuance of what's been done there, you know? So, yeah, it's very cool, and, I actually yeah, it's something I'm interested in getting more into, now
Hmm.
that, like, I've kinda, like, dipped my toe into it, and I've, um, kinda gone down a rabbit hole a little bit of, like, so with EmuDeck, if you support them on Patreon, you can get support for cloud saves,
Hmm.
um, and I'm like, "Oof," like, how sick would it be to get a setup where it's like, "Alright, I have, like, my main Steam Deck, right? I still have my original Steam Deck, which I wanna turn into a, like, emulation station, right? And have that connected to a CRT. And then, I have, right now I'm using a different emulator. I'm using one that's called Pizza Boy on my phone, but if you get their Patreon, you can get the EmuDeck. Like, they have an Android, version that's only
Okay.
for subscribers right now. And, yeah, I'm just like, "Man, wouldn't that be sick?" To
Just
have,
play your
like,
things wherever the hell you are.
yeah, and, like, every one of them except for my phone powered by a Steam Deck.
Yeah, that would be good. And also, like, if you have the CRT set up as well, you can experience the games through that in the way that they were supposed to be seen. You can
Exactly.
force them into 4:3, uh, and yeah, experience them essentially on the same hardware, because it's still displaying the same image. You're just displaying it on a different style of
Exactly,
TV.
right. Yeah,
The
and
only
my
thing you no,
I
sorry,
was
go
gonna
on.
say my thought there too is, like, I wanna get a, 'cause I'm gonna use the Steam Deck docking station, and I'm gonna plug in, like, a USB, like hub into it and
Mhm.
get a wired version of every console controller so that I can play it on the original
Yeah.
controller as well.
That's cool. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that idea as well.
Be fun.
One thing you can't salvage about Game Boy Advance, I learned this week the harsh way, is because of how just when on the Game Boy and on the NES and systems like that, chip tunes went hard and
Oh my
they
god,
they
the
were
Game Boy
still
Advance
crisp,
sound chip is so bad.
awful. And I learnt this because I was like, because I've been playing a bunch of Castlevania stuff and I played on the Game Boy Advance collection, the Castlevania Game Boy Advance collection. I'd played for a couple of those games, and I really liked the Symphony of the Night soundtrack. And I was trying to find one specific track, and I found a playlist that had all of the Castlevania soundtracks in it, and I was sort of flicking through some of them, and I was like, "Oh yeah, this PS1 soundtrack sounds phenomenal." You know, it still sounds like it's got all the original instruments. You can hear the drummer going like ham on it. And then I went to one of the Game Boy Advance ones, and it sounded exactly like it was playing on the Game Boy Advance. It was just like really low quality, and it's a shame that those songs aren't preserved in a way that isn't
Yeah.
straight from the Game Boy, and they don't sound like trash. It's why I hate the Pokemon Gen 3 soundtrack because for some reason they were like trumpets, man. We're doing everything with trumpets. We're
Everything's so fucking, like, loud and,
yeah.
like, it's just yeah.
Wah, ba, ba, blah. Like
Yeah.
it's just so distorted. And I think that it's such a shame that even when you play re-releases of these games, there is no way to salvage that without redoing the
No.
music entirely.
It's
Um,
crazy too because it's like that's literally the only, like, Nintendo handheld that, like, isn't used as an instrument. You know, like, they're
yeah,
like, Sierra's band literally, like, on their last album, like, there are multiple tracks that are a Game Boy instrument. That's like
nice.
you can literally get, this setup where you, like, add like an instrument out cable to the Game Boy sound chip and like plug into it and use it as a
Mm,
brain for a synthesizer.
yeah, boy,
And
that
it's like a
sounds
really
cool.
common thing that people do it with the DS. People do it with the DS Lite and like all this other stuff. And it's like Game Boy Advance just sounds like ass. So
Yeah,
it's like
really does.
pretty much nobody uses it because
Yeah.
it's just so low quality.
I was playing another Metroid 2 remake today, and it's a remake of Metroid 2 that uses Zero Mission sort of as its base. It's like the sprites are all from Zero Mission, the design of it was from Zero Mission, the controls from Zero Mission, and a lot of that is also the sounds are from Zero Mission. So you've got like when you jump, when you shoot, the door noises and all that stuff. But because there's not enough there to cater for all the monsters and cater for the music and stuff like that, there's such a clear difference between the music, which sounds crisp, and these new monsters make a noise that sounds crisp. But then as soon as you fire a missile or shoot something or do a jump, it's the Game Boy Advance sound, and it's really obvious that it's like this "rah, rah, rah, rah," as opposed to this sort of like clear sound. Um, and this is something I genuinely didn't even consider until this week when I booted up on uh, Spotify the Aria of Sorrow soundtrack and was like, God, this sounds awful compared to Symphony of the Night that was 10 years before it. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a shame. It's one
You
of
were
the only
saying
things you can't fix with the Steam Deck.
yes, yeah, yeah, and I think it's a shame that Game Boy Advance is doomed to be like that forever, and also a shame that like I said before, the colors, I would never have known that. And now I'm playing through Metro Fusion. Like I've spent 20 years playing this game without the original
Wrong.
atmosphere. Yeah, I've been playing, and there's no way to fix it because Nintendo certainly don't do it. And there's certainly it's not something that's widely known enough. I wasn't aware of it. It's just it was an immediate like, oh yeah, I get this. I can't believe I've never noticed this before. That Metro Fusion is just so bright.
It's particularly funny too to think about, like you said, right? Like, you didn't know it, I didn't know it. Like, we're pretty dialed in. Like, you make pixel art, right? Like, I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's something that you didn't know, right? That was such a
yeah,
key element to how it used to be done,
yeah.
and it's crazy to think about.
That is also when I said before about like how we're looking at how people have nostalgia for pixel art wrong. I don't technically agree with that because I do have because I played a lot of these games on the SP anyway, so I do have nostalgia for how they originally looked.
Yeah,
Still, and
yeah.
I still think that's a valid art style. I don't think people making Game Boy Advance, NES, SNES style games now are wrong for doing that.
No,
But I
it's just different, you
yeah,
know?
and I think those games are specifically made in that style now, whereas the games back then were specifically made in that style to work on a different kind of TV. So
Mhm.
just before anyone has an issue with what I said, um, one thing you mentioned a minute ago was about having all the original controllers um, to sort of hook into the back of your Steam Deck dock. Um, and one thing that I found when I revisit old PC games, and I had this before I had the Steam Deck, the same issue where I was like, oh, I want to play Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, and I bought the games on GOG, and I boot it up, and there's no control scheme for it. You have to play mouse and keyboard. I don't want to do that. I don't want to play this game. I played on PS1 on that. So I'd have to emulate it. And when you emulate it, you're limited by the hardware of the PS1. Whereas when I got the Steam Deck and discovered Steam community control schemes that you can just download, all of a sudden I was able to play like all of the Legacy of Kain games, all the Prince of Persia games, Psychonauts. Those are just three I can think of like now. Those are games that don't support controllers, but someone has gone through and ported or like matched the keyboard controls to the controller, so you don't have to sit there and force yourself to play these PC versions of these games that you played on console with a mouse and keyboard, or go through the process for setting up yourself, or sort of, I don't know, downloading mods or whatever. You can just play the game as intended because you clicked one button, and you can only do that on Steam, and it works perfectly. I played through all of these games on a controller and would not have known they weren't made for controller because someone's gone in and set them up. And I think Steam community control stuff, community controller profiles are such an underrated feature on the deck to be able
Total
to just
game
pick up
changer.
yeah, exactly, to be able to just pick up someone else's work. And same with the EMU deck as well. All of the things you can do on EMU deck, like, up the resolution scaling, or swap to widescreen or whatever, or do a save state, speed things up, all the stuff you can do. You can do that by, if you just look at the when you boot the game up, it's already got a control scheme set, and that control scheme tells you what to do. You press these two buttons. It says press these two buttons to access this menu and do this. And there's all those things are just at your fingertips without having to pause the game, go up to the menu, click that, or set up a hotkey on your keyboard or something. It's just all there on the controller while you're playing. You just press the button you need to do, or the combination of buttons you need to do, and you're away. And you can set things to the back buttons. I would quickly want to swap the screen on the Wii U or the 3DS or whatever. You just press the back button and it does that for you instead of having to actively go into a menu and do it. And it just makes the whole thing feel a lot better.
For sure. And you saying that reminded me of one of the features that I know Steve always likes to champion, which is like the gyro, right? And like how you can
Yes.
use that for aiming in like old games. You can use gyro aiming in like, Resident Evil 4 on the GameCube if
Yeah.
you want, right? And it's like that's
Yeah.
really cool. Like
And
it
that's just at the Steam level as well. That's not even something that has to necessarily be set up in the emulation
yeah,
or
that's
anything. You can
literally
just turn
just
on.
key mapping, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or you just toggle on gyro actor's mouse and it works. And that
Yeah.
works for any multiplayer game. I was, yeah, I was playing a yet unrevealed Valve game we're not allowed to talk about earlier, and started up
That
with
okay.
with.
I don't know.
I'm
I
not
don't
going to go
know
into any
that.
details. I'm not going to go into any details. It opens up with immediately gyro on, and I was like, yeah, this is how it should be. There should be gyro all the time.
Just for future reference, you might want to just say, "I'm playing a game that's under embargo," and not give a
It's not
bunch.
not under embargo. That's not how it works. I'm just saying that game that I'm not going to mention has thumbstick gyro as default, and it works, and it's great, and I like playing games like that, and I like being able to just toggle that on or toggle it off. There are some games where like you boot it up and you don't know it's on. I think Sekiro and Dark Souls 3 have that on by default, and I was just so confused about like why is my stick not doing it? And it's because whenever your thumb's on the thumbstick, you're also on gyro. So I'm like, yeah, the camera is just doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
The first time I booted up my Steam Deck, one of the first games I downloaded to play on it was Left 4 Dead 2
Hmm.
because I was like, I want to play something that like I know well, and yeah, I didn't know that gyro was on by default, and I kept, like, having these moments because like, I was, like, I'm, like, I was, like, sitting on my couch, like, leaning forward, and I would have these moments where it was just, like, touching, and then it was, like, the screen was freaking out, and I was like, "What is happening? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
why
yeah.
is it
What's happening with my
stuttering
deck?
like that?" And it's like, "Oh, okay. Whoops."
I got my Steam Deck and immediately went away with some friends for the weekend. I took it with me, and I was like, wanted to show off this cool new toy, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I downloaded Sekiro while I was there. Have a go." And he was like, "What is wrong with this thing?" Because I hadn't played it myself yet. He was like, "What is wrong with this thing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I picked it up and I was like, "Whoa, like what the hell? Like this is broken." But no, yeah, it's just the gyro's on by default for certain games.
Yeah, it's definitely a little disorienting if you're not ready for
Absolutely.
it.
Uh, the last point I want to make on this topic, I'm going to bookend it with another Metroid one, and that's sort of playing the Metroid Prime trilogy through Prime Hack, which is just a version of Dolphin that is separate and is completely configured to play the Metroid Prime trilogy as a twin stick shooter, a la Metroid Prime Remastered, except it's all 3 games. And that is still the best way to play the Metroid Prime trilogy, even including 1, because you can play them all together. You know, as much as I like Metroid Prime Remastered, to be able to play the full trilogy with the same control scheme is very nice. And when you get to the end of 1 remastered, you're like, "Oh, I want to play the rest, and I can't." But to be able to just boot up the Metroid Prime trilogy, and it has all the correct button prompts, it has all the correct, it's got all the things that would usually be mapped to like pointing to buttons. All of this work they've done to make that feel like a native experience is so good. And for how easy it is, you literally just drag the ISO file or whatever the file is for Wii games into the folder. Bang! It just works exactly as you expect it to, with better visuals. All of these things. Um, it's just great to be able to play these games again, and in the best way to play them, because there's no other way you can play them other than on PC with a controller that feels like a native experience that isn't because I'm pointing and waggling and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yo, the fans that do those projects really just out here doing God's
oh,
work, you know?
so much respect for them. It
Thankless.
even got me.
Thankless work.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Thanks, by the way. Just no longer is it thankless work.
Thank
I
you. Thank you from
Yeah.
us, the Steam Deck
Thank you from the
podcast,
Steam Deck
the only
podcast.
people that actually appreciate you.
Yeah. What is wrong with you guys for not appreciating them?
Well, our
I
listeners, no, they're good too.
Oh, yeah, sorry, well, just yeah, if you're not listening to the Steam Deck podcast, you're a
If you're
bad
not
person.
listening to
That's
this
the
podcast, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, fuck you. But also listen, please, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, come on to the right side of history. It's not too late.
Yeah. And yeah, that's just like, oh, I was just thinking about all the games that I've been playing on the Steam Deck and how the Steam Deck has improved them for me so much and the reasons why, and I thought, I wish I had a vehicle to talk about this, and I do, and it's this vehicle,
There you
and
go.
yeah. Thanks for listening to me, go on and on, everybody.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was my pleasure. I hope you listeners enjoyed it as well. I think the last thing that I want to just shout out to, I guess, put a pin on this one. Sorry to not let you just end it on Metroid again, but I let you.
Fine, crack
Yeah,
on.
think of this as the epilogue. You
Yeah,
ended it
yeah,
on
yeah.
Metroid. This is the epilogue.
I got 4 Metroid games in the Steam Deck podcast, man. I'm cool, man. You
That's
do what
good,
you need to
right?
do.
Hey, right? Yeah, it's slam dunk, baby. I think just the last thing I wanted to call out, is the experience that Steve has talked about with games like Days Gone, and that I'm currently going through now with Marvel Midnight Suns, where I think that there are just some games that are like, just so at home on Steam Deck, and like the ability to, um, like the last couple weeks that I've been playing that game, right? Like be playing this big hundreds hours, if you want it to be tactical RPG kind of game, and like just have it at my fingertips. I know a
Mhm.
lot of us had that experience when we were playing Persona 5 Royal last year. Like it is just so nice to have that, like, and it's like you can do this on console, you can do this on PC, but like, you know, it it hits a little bit different for me anyway, to have the ability of like, I've got my Steam Deck with me, like it's literally next to me right now.
Mhm.
When I go upstairs, I'm gonna take it with me. It's just with me throughout the day, more or less. And when I have the time, right? Like you and I were talking prior to sitting down to record the show. I finished my lunch. I had a couple minutes before we were gonna start playing. Popped open the game, chip away at it a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
you just
Like,
dip in, dip out. It's the reason the Switch hit for me so nicely was just
mhm.
like big Breath of the Wild, big 100-hour game. I didn't have to sit in my room playing that the whole time. I could be at work or on my lunch break or something and just dip in and out of it and do little bits and pieces and do little tasks. And that is, yeah, that is the benefit of handheld gaming that is now accessible for any game, really.
And like I think like specifically like the modular handheld gaming, right? Like you said with the
Mm.
Switch that kicked it off, but like, we have the dock with the deck, but also like, if you're a PC gamer, like you can play it on your PC and then jump on the deck and like have
Mhm.
that kind of just like I, I don't know. It's like it's a thought I've been formulating for years, and like I don't quite have the language for it, but I guess it's just like the way that the hardware evolves your relationship with the software, right? Because
Mhm.
it's like it's the same thing that I always argue is the benefit of like the current gen consoles, right? When they're the folks that are critical of it, it's like, hey, like, whatever your criticisms are, like I'm not saying anybody is wrong for feeling the way they feel. For me though, like uh non-existent loading times and things like that.
Hmm.
Like those are things that are like they change the way you play because it's like in an hour of gameplay, right? Like that might have saved you 15 minutes that you would have
Yeah,
just been at a loading screen or you would have just been, this or that.
yeah.
And it's like
And quick resume where you don't have to actually boot into something, you can just
you're
pick
just
up
back.
exactly where you left off, even if you've been playing something else.
And that's exactly what, like, I'm talking about with, like, the Steam Deck, and obviously, not as easy, you can't, like, have multiple pieces of software open depending
Hmm.
on what it is. But yeah, but, like, just having that ability to, like, have the Steam Deck be a device that meets me where I'm at any given time is, I think, one of the things that is, like, gives games that quote unquote improvement,
Yeah.
because like there are games like Marvel Midnight Suns that like I don't know that I would have played if it wasn't on deck. Not because I didn't like it, not because I wasn't interested, but just because it's like it's a big, long, meaty game, and there are like, only so many hours in the day that I have to sit down at the PC or at the TV or
Hmm.
whatever and like sit and just play a game. And when you're trying to get through a lot of games and you're trying to like taste a lot of tastes, like, those seconds, minutes, they count, and
Yep.
like being able to just, you know, chip away at a game that like, if I want to do side missions, this or that or whatever, right? Like it really is such a game changer. And like that is to me like one of the biggest dynamic shifts of this generation versus the previous generations of just like starting with the Switch, right? Of just like all of my devices feel like they are so much more tailored towards just like streamlining getting me to like having the controller in my hands and playing the game, And like I appreciate that quality of life thing more than any other thing we could go and look at. Battery life, storage, like speed, frame rate, whatever, right? Like that is the differentiator to me and that's one of the Steam Deck's biggest strengths for sure.
Absolutely. What a lovely ending that is to that, because I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it speaks to why we like the device enough to come sit down and talk about it for an hour every week.
Yeah, yeah. It's just it's a device that I very much love to have in the arsenal and I'm always happy to
Yes,
be an evangelist for.
absolutely. Before we round things off, I would like to ask if anyone's listening and they have games that they particularly enjoy playing on Steam Deck for whatever reason that it is better for you on the Steam Deck, whether you've emulated it or you're playing it from Steam or anything like that. Um, maybe you are a big Overwatch guy or Overwatch 2 guy and you can play in the same room as your friends without having to bring a whole PC around, something like that. I don't know. Let us know. I really would be, I just love hearing how people use their devices and how the Steam Deck brings you closer to the thing you like them to do, which is gaming.
Well said. Thank you guys for joining us here in another episode of the Steam Deck Podcast. Before we head out, I want to remind you that this episode of the show is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of August. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, aka Sobi, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, Voodoo Vic, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. Y'all the realest to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. If you want to go check out Nintendo Noise and Flip Screen Games podcast, if you want to go check out all the cool things that we're doing here in the community, you want to become a part of the show, write in with your thoughts. All that and much more can be done over at flipscreen.games. However you choose to get involved, we thank you oh so much for your support and for tuning in to another episode of the Steam Deck podcast. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Max. We'll see you next week.